I forgot to come up here before, didn't I?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
that's all right. You're close enough to the mic. They heard you.
Morning. Today's speaker is Rachel Ray. She is the coalition coordinator for the Port Angeles Healthy Youth Coalition. I'm really happy she's here today because I have no idea what this group does. And I'm really looking forward to finding out. And also, you're a graduate in geography. I graduated in part from geography many years ago, so I know you got good things to say. Rachel Ray earned a BA in geography and global health from the University of Washington and later became a certified prevention professional. Rachel first worked in nonprofit program management before serving as a community health director in the Peace Corps, focused on gender-based violence and infectious disease prevention. After returning to the United States, she focused her work on youth substance use prevention and mental health promotion, and had the opportunity to serve 3 community coalitions across the state of Washington, from the frontier geographies of the Northeast to the suburbs of Seattle, now Port Angeles. Rachel and her husband are excited to be back in the area and are very much enjoying the rain, great local coffee houses, and friendly, welcoming neighbors. So let's give a fine welcome to Rachel. Come on up.
Well, speaking at a podium. Good morning. Good morning, everyone on Zoom. Excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So my name is Rachel Ray. I have nothing in common with the TV personality chef apart from my name. I can get started with the slides. Thank you. All right, so I'd like to give an overview today of the Port Angeles Healthy Youth Coalition, a little bit of a history about prevention, and I also have a spotlight story for prevention that I'll save for the end if we have time. It's a short video. But just to get started, the Port Angeles Healthy Youth Coalition is a local coalition serving the Port Angeles School District. And next slide. Oh, overview, right. So hopefully by the end, you'll be able to describe what youth substance use prevention is, which it is, and share the purpose of prevention for the community of Port Angeles and identify what your role is. And okay, so I'll start with why I'm here, why this resource is here. Just a definition of terms. Youth substance misuse. It's quite a mouthful, and I want to define it before I keep using it to make sure everyone in the room, we all know what the term is that I'm using. So youth substance use is when a young person uses a legal or non-legalized substance while they're still developing in their early years. And the way that's categorized is rather than it being a use of a substance, it's called a misuse of a substance. So if a glass of cognac is meant to be drank at the end of the day by someone over the age of 21, it's not meant to be drank at the end of the day by a 15-year-old. Not that would be their preference, but the idea is it's when it's biologically appropriate for a young person to use a substance. And the reason why there's a focus on preventing the use of a substance is because for those of you that are familiar with dependency or addiction, what that looks like in the community, 90% of dependency on a substance begins with high school use or earlier use. So 90% is quite a large amount, and so you can understand why the state and federal governments are so invested in preventing use in that age range, because it increases the risk of developing a dependency. Can we go back? This is, before we go into fun stuff, this is the continuum of care, and it helps me, I use it sort of like a compass so that I know where I am. So in the blue, the light blue and the dark blue, on this half of the continuum is all promotion, health promotion, and health prevention. And everything after that is treatment and recovery. And what I work in and what the coalition works in is strictly the promotion of health and the preventing of disease. And then on the other side are people that provide direct service. Those are mental health therapists and treatment providers, and those that support the recovery community. So when we're doing promotion and prevention, the intention is to capture an individual before they are in a position where they're needing treatment. So capturing a young person before they get to a place where there's a dependency. So I want to talk about the funding and what's here. So the Port Angeles Healthy Youth Coalition, it first was organized in 2003 by the University of Washington. They did a pilot study. They selected Port Angeles as a pilot site for their Communities That Care initiative. It was to see how communities could organize to make a difference in preventing young people in their community from, coming at risk of addiction. And that existed for a couple of years. And then the coalition received different iterations of funding, and it kind of went through a lull period before the Washington State University Prevention Fellows Program decided to choose Port Angeles again as a pilot site for them to come and do more prevention work in the community. And they advocated that Port Angeles would benefit from being a part of the Community Prevention and Wellness Initiative. CPWI, or CPWI, I prefer CPWI, was founded in 2011 for Washington State communities to be able to compete competitively for federal grant funding. So prior to this initiative, if you were a community in maybe a lower resource or more rural area, you're competing with suburbs and urban areas to attract federal funding to support your community. And what this did was say, at the state level, we'll support, we'll advocate on behalf of small, rural, and more remote communities so that they can be competitive with this funding. So they become the conduit for funding that comes into the state, and then they support rural communities that have access to funding. So it started in 2011 for rural remote communities and has since grown to have at least one per county. I think the only county that only has one is Garfield County. All the other counties have more than one, but we can understand why Garfield would probably have one. So it's all right. But otherwise, there's many now multiplying, and the model that's developed since 2011 is now what's being replicated across the country. So what Washington pioneered is this idea that if you give communities a pot of money and say, you need to improve outcomes for your young people, it turns out the local people know what the answers are to do that, and that produces outcomes. So for Clallam County, Forks was selected in 2003 to become a recipient site. Joyce was selected in 2016, now Port Angeles in 2020. So once you're a part of the cohort, the funding actually exists, this is why it's so competitive, on an indefinite stream. So there is no application for continuation. It just comes if you continue to meet your goals of spending down the money. So and they're very flexible in what that looks like, because it's meant to be low barrier. Like if you're in a rural community and you're starting, there's a year where the focus has been more in like the sector of agriculture, and community hasn't had that opportunity to come together and focus on this funding. They give grace to what they call those local conditions that are influencing whether or not you can spend the money. So it's extremely flexible, extremely supportive. So once you get to be a part of this cohort, you get to have that kind of relaxation of, it's not about me having to continually recompete for the grant. I just get to focus on what the kids need in my backyard or my neighbors. So congratulations to Port Angeles for competing and being able to achieve getting that funding source. And that's what funds my position. So let's see. Next slide. Yes.
What are the criteria for what did you get chosen because you have a lot of issues?
That's a great question, and it's kind of a blend. It's a blend. So on one hand, there is a preference towards communities that are in need of addressing substances, but I would say the earlier model, the earlier cohorts, that was more the emphasis, and now they're growing, and it's become more just communities that say that have that desire to utilize it are more available, which is why Port Angeles has chosen as a later cohort because the substance use is maybe not as extreme as in other communities in the state, but the desire to have the funding is so strong. So that's the little bit of insight I have there, but not to say that substance, we'll look at the numbers in a moment about what it looks like here. So when the funding comes into the community, it requires a coalition of people, and there's no qualifications or requirements, it's just people coming together. And it is to serve the school district because that's the data that we have is for the school district. And what their mission, they've decided their mission to be is to aim to prevent young people from developing an unhealthy relationship with substance. And they define unhealthy relationship as using a substance as a way to manage anxiety or depression would be an inappropriate application of using a substance, for example. And next slide. So talking about data. So this is the third coalition I've had the opportunity to work in. And in all three communities, and this is what I've understood from across the state, there does not exist a community in Washington state where most over 50% of young people are misusing substances. It doesn't exist, it's always less than most, but just because it's not most doesn't mean there isn't room for improvement. And getting those numbers as low as we can is the goal. So what we look at is the Washington Healthy Youth Survey. For those of you that might be familiar with that, it's every 2 years, and it's anonymous, self-reported, where young people report their mental health and their substance and their family life and their peer life. And then we get to look at those numbers and kind of get a sense of what the picture looks like without talking to every youth directly. So for Port Angeles, next slide. It's kind of hard to see. There's some bars in white, but oh, thank you. So this is Port Angeles compared to the state of Washington. So as you'll see with alcohol use, 10th grade is the benchmark year that's used for prevention decision making. It is consistent numbers that's just become a benchmark across the country for substance use. So we have 2012 numbers down to 2021. For alcohol, you'll see the trends almost exactly mirror the state. And in some areas they're improved compared to the state average. And it's a downward trend. That's actually happening across most of the country, but it's also happening in Washington where young people are not reporting as much alcohol use. And first I should say, this is a young person says they use alcohol regularly. So this is what's going down from 28.4 down to the pandemic year. So that's a weird number, but 8.3. And that's expected to go up post-pandemic because that's just such a funky time. But the averages for Port Angeles is 19% average for Washington over that same time period is 18. So really comparable. So the coalition looks at that and says, it's important to talk about, but it's not a high priority area. And then, yes.
Regularly. Are they given a definition or is it just something?
Use within a 30-day period. So like a month period of use.
Okay. Oh.
Thank you. Cannabis is looking a little different than the state. So that's a question mark. So we can say young people in the state, the numbers have plateaued since 2012. They're not going up necessarily, but they're not really going down. And the numbers are not telling as consistent of a story in Port Angeles, but probably where this was thought of as a mid-priority because the averages are pretty similar and the numbers aren't too terribly different from the state. The pandemic year number is pretty interesting, being double what the state is during a pandemic year. It brings up questions of access and questions of where young people are utilizing cannabis as a way of managing stress or anxiety. So that's a big question mark. And then this one, these are the two areas where the coalition has thought is having more priority. It's the cigarette use and vape use. So it's really common if you ask young people why they smoke cigarettes, it's usually related to stress. So when we see these numbers, it's thought of as being just an indication of stress, but in the state and actually in the country, cigarette use has been declining in a pretty steep way, which we can all understand with Tobacco 21 happening, and there's more like environmental policy around where you can smoke, when you can smoke, how you can smoke, getting access to cigarettes. So it's not as common to see young people smoking. So in the state, it went from in 2012, 9.5 down to pre-pandemic 5% of 10th graders, really quite low. And then for Port Angeles, haven't seen that downward trend. So that just is an opportunity to, again, ask kind of a question as to why and get more information. And then for e-cigarette vape use, the numbers are much higher than the state. And again, same with cannabis, the number is double, almost nearly double for Port Angeles during the pandemic. So that is what leads the coalition to have conversations around where do we want to be able to invest the prevention funding that we receive to make a difference. Prevention funding is a stream of funding that will continuously come because a great portion of it comes from the revenue of selling substances. So cannabis, the funding that comes from cannabis retail is what funds prevention. Same with the taxation on tobacco and alcohol products. So the funding is here for that purpose, and there's room to make a difference.
Oops.
I have a spotlight story that talks a little bit more about what prevention looks like in a community environment. Just an example from another community I worked in. I'll save the video for the end if we have time. It's a bit longer, but I'll skip ahead and just give you a brief overview of what the video has to offer. On the next slide, it'll show, okay, so here we go, like with prevention. Prevention starts with asking why there's a problem. In the Breaking the Ice video, young people were noticing that in their community, there was a lot of tobacco use. And so the young people asked, why do we have tobacco use in our community? Why is it happening here and not in other communities? Which is a really valid question. And with that question in mind, they went to their student body and did a survey to ask what are the impacts in your life that lead you to making the decision to regularly smoking tobacco. And the answer was surprising to the young people, which was they didn't feel like they had people to lean on in their lives. So the way they articulated it for themselves is, I don't have family at home that back me up. And I don't feel like people at school back me up when I come to school. So to manage those feelings, they were using tobacco. On the next slide. So then the kids were asked this classic prevention, what do you want to grow in your community and what are you seeking to reduce? And this was applied to their school community. And they said they want to grow young people feeling excited to come to school. That was the measure they wanted to see grow. And what they wanted to reduce was young people feeling lonely or not feeling like they had friends in connection at school. And on the next slide. So they asked, what's one thing that we can do? What would be our best opportunity to address this concern? And they built a program called Breaking the Ice, which if we have time to watch the video, we'll watch that. We'll show you what was that strategy that they implemented in their school to make a difference. And next slide. And then at the end, there's a listening and learning. What did we learn about the impacts from what we implemented, and where can we listen to be able to do more in this future? And what time is it, by the way?
You've got 10 minutes till the questions. You're doing really well.
Okay, all right. The video is like 8 to 10 minutes, so it's tight. So I'll do these slides next, and then if we have time, we'll like run it in. We can end the video short too. But I wanted to get to these because on the next slide, I think we'll start with I love these visuals just to get a capturing of prevention because it's just tough. It's like a kind of nebulous topic. So what isn't, we'll start with what isn't youth substance use or misuse prevention. And the quote that I think sums it up that could really take away my need for the slides anyway is for every complex problem, there's a simple solution that's wrong. And that's sort of been the history of prevention, and it's come a long way. So on the next slide, This is something that did not work. So initially, the idea was young people use substances, we're just going to scare them, and they're just not going to use substances anymore. Turned out not only did that strategy not work, but it made the kids that saw it more likely to use a substance. So if you saw a mock car crash, it put you at greater risk as a young person for using a substance. So not a great idea. Next slide. Shame and stigma. Making the kids feel bad about it, or feel bad about their family members, or feel bad about people in their community. Turns out that also didn't work as a strategy either. And next one. Bad science. Terrible strategy. This is what happens if you smoke cannabis. And then when that didn't happen, not only did they think, well, cannabis is safe, but they thought any future science wasn't true. So that was really a terrible idea. Next one. Risk without relationship. So probably almost all of us remember, like, this is your brain on drugs, fried egg on the pavement. So it turns out that it's pretty like comical to a young person to just show them something like that without there being a relationship involved. So like if a grandma comes to you and says, honey, I care about you. This is what I learned about what happens when you use high concentration THC. So make sure you're taking care of yourself. That impacts way differently than an infomercial with a politician saying, don't do it. So it's learning like how and when to use messages without overwhelming kids with a sort of attitude of you don't know and I'm going to tell you. Next slide. Politicized prevention. Some of you might remember the DARE program. It was a school-based program. Not harping on DARE, great program. The only problem with DARE is that since the 1980s, they measured that it wasn't effective. Didn't have an impact. It didn't have a bad, harmful impact like the fear and shame strategies did, but it didn't change outcomes either. And so the idea was, unfortunately, it became more of like an opportunity of self-promotion for people that were promoting the DARE program than it was about thinking about how we're really going to make an impact for young people. So the intention just got a little bit off track. So that's what isn't prevention. And then on the next slide, I'm going to show you what is prevention, what's been measured time and time again since we've recovered from the 80s and 90s to be what really works. And the first thing that comes to the forefront on the next slide is culture. Surprisingly, having culture and tradition in a community protects a young person from using substances, whether that's an annual Halloween event or like with ice skating that they get accustomed, anything that's a tradition and culture within a community protects a young person from using substances. And the next slide. Healthy and safe bonds with people in their family and outside of their family. Most crucially, having 2 or more adults that are not in their family that they can come to talk about their feelings and rely on. That's been proven to increase the chance of young person's substance. And the next one is pro-social, chances to be with your peers and friends and feeling like you have belonging in high school. It's particularly in high school that shows to decrease use. Next slide. Not as exciting, protective laws and norms are protective. So tobacco 21 is one of those examples that will hopefully delay young people from using substances. And on the next slide, accessibility. This is an image of like lock bags for storing opioids, but the real question mark around accessibility is young people with they're experiencing challenges and stress. They're going to access something to relieve that stress and anxiety. So what is it that they have access to? Do they have access to a mental health care provider, or do they have access to binge drinking with their friends on a Friday night? What is it that they have access to is what they're going to turn to. So next slide. Collaboration. It turns out that when communities work together to make a difference and they work with you, it leads to outcomes. And the next slide is education. So when you're able to, especially in this example, when kids create their own content to educate, form their peers about things they want them to know about substances, that's also proven to be effective. And education can have a lot of different tones to it. And if it's a tone, especially of that's really collaborative and in the spirit of getting everyone on the same page, it ends up being more effective too. And the next slide, reflection. So I hope what you saw with what is prevention, it's not surprising content, it's all really intuitive. These are things that if you asked us probably in the 80s or 90s, we would have said, sure, like I don't think you just need to terrify children. I think if you work with them, it's going to be a better idea. But it took a while for the field to catch up. to that reality that leading with the positive and what we want to grow in the community ends up having a bigger difference by bringing people together. So it's not news or surprise content. So I have a short video, and we can always end it early, or I can kind of just defer to you. What you think.
5 minutes, so we have questions.
Okay, 5
So,
minutes?
yeah.
Okay. Well, let's see. Let's start it and then we'll end it early.
This week has really brought about a sense of unity that I didn't expect. I thought this is new, this is exciting, but is it really going to be meaningful? Is it really going to have a powerful impact? And it really did. I think it's a testament to the students and to the teachers. Everyone that participated created this environment of support and togetherness that was more than any of us could have hoped for.
What surprised me about Breaking the Ice Week was really the school involvement. I knew that a lot of kids coming into it were not sure about how well it would work, or they're really nervous about breaking out of their shells and getting to know new people that they did interact with on the daily. And I think that all the people that really stepped outside their comfort zone and started to make new friends and meet new people really is what surprised me. It was cool to see how many people were open to change.
There's that ownership of this is our school, our culture, our social structure. And they can make a difference.
You know, so much of what I remember from high school is how there was groups, like there was the drama kids and there was the jock kids and there was all these different little sub-social things. And this put everybody on equal terms. They were working together with maybe people that they didn't hang out with, but that's how you get to like people, is get to know them. So I think it's very good. I hope that by kids getting to know each other, that they'll want to look out for each other and want to help each other in ways that that they aren't having to turn to other coping mechanisms to deal with the stress that they have. Kids are under so much stress, and sometimes they don't know how to get the help, and they feel left out and they feel alone. But if they could be part of this group or know that there's someone that had their back, maybe that wouldn't be the group that they would try to fit into, is the group that was making those choices. Maybe they would see that there's alternates that are safer, that are healthier, they're more positive, that are better for them now and later.
I feel that through this week, I was able to learn a lot of different things about different people through the vlogs and the get to know you better cups. And so, yes, I do. I feel like I learned more about the people I didn't necessarily spend every day with. Friendship is very important, and it can save a person's life, honestly. Like, it could be the thing that gets the person up every day. If they aren't having family that's necessarily backing them up, they know that they have that friend that they can lean on.
Express how they feel, express who they are, kind of like get out of their little shell and open up to like the rest of the high school, get some more friends, have more groups.
There's a lot of people going through struggles here and they need help. So I understand that as one of the people here, I need to help them a lot more.
It shows them that they're not alone with the pain they went through. Like maybe if they had a abandoned father, maybe like parents died, they could show that other people have gone through something similar to that. And maybe it was like, oh, well, I wonder what they did to be happy. Maybe I should ask them instead of trying to do drugs and that.
Just the connections that were made, even though they're minor, help everybody to recognize that we all face some problems, and to just be able to face those problems together really will help.
I thought that the activities were really fun, and the fact that we got to be in groups of people we didn't really know super well. So that was really cool, like getting to work with them, just like get to know their personalities a little better.
I like to blog. I got to know a lot of things I didn't know about people and like what they like. what they do. I like that. That was probably my favorite thing.
The cup towers, when we got to really talk about what we had in common. One of my group's common factors was siblings. We all had at least one sibling, and it was really interesting to see how many people actually relate on multiple levels that maybe you didn't know prior to that event.
Getting to know each other better will help create a better school environment, because even though we're small, we don't know each other. Or we look at, you're an athlete, you're in drama, you're in FFA, and not realize that we're really one big school.
So the students broke up their entire school body.
Be sure to defend.
by,
I really thought that would be
by people that
just a
can
simple
show each
thing,
other.
and no one
then
take
had
it serious.
activities where they
Everybody
got
was
to-
going at it. It was crazy. There's people, again, groups working together. And
Sorry.
just smashing ice. My hands are cold, trading out. They really performed like a team. And in a way, it was really funny, because it's like, instead of people.
So they lobbied their school board and their school admin to ask for a whole week where they could break the ice and have activities to help them to get to know each other better. And it built up over the week where they got to do that. And it was their solution to this problem, became an annual tradition in the school where every week they have a break in the ice week when they come back from winter vacation, just to get to know each other better. So that's an example of how this prevention funding that we have in this community can really be actualized. At the very end of the video is a fantastic bonfire where they burn their fears of the future and have s'mores. That is totally how everything ends in Springdale. It ends with a bonfire. And that's what I love about the funding is that as a community, we have a unique culture and we get to actualize it within our culture. So that's my plug for what it could look like.
Does the Boys and Girls Club have any impact in our community today, regarding high schools?
That's a good question. I've never looked at any data around the outcomes of any particular like non-governmental group, just because our funding is government funding. But I would say that they check a lot of those boxes for pro-social mentorship, and they probably have their own internal mechanisms for measurement that would actually look visual.
I can really understand the value of utilizing the school environment, because that's where most of these kids are going to interact. But I wonder what is this, the school district or the teachers, what are their feelings about this? You know, they've got a lot of challenges themselves and curriculum that has to be gone through and all the time teaching. You know, are they accepting of this and promoting, or do they just see this as one more thing that they have to do that takes away from what they're trying to get done?
That's a great question. And I would say it varies by school district and it varies by year. So for this funding, because it came to life during COVID, the coalition does not approach the school to say, here's some additional things we want to put on you at this time. So if they put a pin in it, it's on pause essentially. But most of the time, the coalition and the staffers that's paid by the coalition does all the legwork. So with those kids, I was the one that they were telling, Rachel, you need to write these posters and they need to say this for us. And you need to coordinate with this teacher to get that information. So I've become like that liaison for the students between the school so that it lessens the burden on the school to have to do that work. So.
And there was a huge time commitment too, you know, it was a whole week out of teaching time.
Yes, that took a lot of lobbying. The kids made a presentation that they brought to the school board, that they brought to the district to say like, this is a priority area for us. It started with only lunch periods. They got a lunch period for each day of that week. And then it grew to them allowing the morning period as well. And then on the final day, it was a half day so they could have the bonfire. So it kind of like incrementally moved towards more time as the kids got more involved.
One last question, anybody? Yes, sir.
How big is that high school, and have you noticed a break between smaller communities versus, something like a school in Issaquah? I mean, is there a break point where it's not as effective versus, the size of our high school?
My last community prior to here was Mercer Island, and that's obviously a lot larger than here, and then Port Angeles and where we were in Springdale. So Springdale, itty bitty 500. Mercer Island, I actually remember how many high schoolers we had. It was a lot. And then here, So of the three, it actually ends up being just as effective in each size, but the kids just implement it differently. The kids just work through it differently. So with Mercer Island, their club was safe club, safe alternative fun events. They do huge events like hiking events or paddleboarding events where they had an alternative to like a drinking event. And that's how they did it. It was really effective. And then in Springdale, it's the entire school community. So it does range, but it's effective in all those things.
Well, Rachel, thanks a million for coming and talking this morning. You know, your presentation was fantastic. Your service to our community and the kids is incredible. And we appreciate you being here. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Just got one coupon out of that. And then just announce last 3 digits.
Last 3 digits?
Yeah.
Are 510.
510.
Jim went again.
I got it.
No.